I'm often asked which Bible translation I use and why. To answer this question, I have decided to make this video to explain why I use this particular translation and not the other. I have spent a lot of time investigating sources of the most popular Bibles today. As strange as it sounds, not all Bibles have the same source. God wrote only one Bible, so do you have the right one? I will only talk about the most important and popular sources due to limited space on my timeline, but also I don't want to bore you with a 3-hour-long video. Let's begin. There is no need to stay too long in the matter of the Old Testament source, as the copying was extremely accurate. However, I would like to add that the oldest surviving text currently known from the Hebrew Bible is dated to 600 BC. These are two small silver scrolls. Controversy starts with the Septuagint from Alexandria, which was a thought-for-thought translation of the Hebrew scriptures into Koine Greek in the 3rd century before Christ. The legend says it was done by the 72 Jews at the request of the Pharaoh Ptolemy II for the Library of Alexandria. A more convincing story says that it was translated by the Hellenistic Jews of Alexandria or even Origen himself in the 3rd century after Christ. Whoever did that was so zealous that even 16 deuterocanonical books were included. In the 2nd century, mainstream rabbinic Judaism rejected Septuagint. The earliest Gentile Christians might have used the Septuagint out of necessity. However, Jesus Christ said, "One jot or one tittle shall in no wise pass from the law." He referred to the Hebrew scriptures and not to the Koine Greek Septuagint. Even though Hebrew was the language of the Jews, God decided that the New Testament should be written in Greek, which was a lingua franca in that time, just like English is today. New Testament has been completed in the second half of the 1st century. But some scholars suggest that majority of the 27 books were finished before the fall of Jerusalem in the year 70, or even before the fire of Rome in the year 64, as these events are not mentioned anywhere in the New Testament. Had the autographs been compiled much later, as some ignorants claim, then certainly they would have mentioned these very important events. One of the first translations of the entire Bible from the 2nd century could be a Vitus Latina, also called Old Latin Bible. It wasn't a bad translation as it came directly from the Greek New Testament originals, but unfortunately contained deuterocanonical books in the Old Testament, just like the Septuagint. In the 2nd century, we have another translation of the Hebrew Old Testament called Peshitta, which means simple version. And in the 5th century, New Testament was translated from the Greek manuscripts. However, for some reasons, 5 canonical books were excluded. They were later added by Harklean version in the 7th century by Thomas of Harkel. Syriac Peshitta wouldn't be a bad translation in my opinion, if not for the missing important verses in the New Testament. It's hard to decide either this translation is closer to Byzantine or Alexandrian text type, so I decided to mark it as somewhere between. Peshitta was so popular that they even knew it in China in the 8th century. This fact was mentioned on the Chinese Nestorian tablet from the same century. Meanwhile, Origen of Alexandria was working on his famous Hexapla, which was a comparison of the Hebrew scriptures with the Septuagint and other Greek translations. According to Eusebius from Caesarea, Origen was a student of Clement of Alexandria who was heavily influenced by Plato. Clement suggested that Christ was neither male nor female. If that is true, then how was baby Jesus circumcised on the 8th day? Just asking. He also supported women's leadership of the church and preached reincarnation and universalism. Clement also believed that Adam was not perfect when created and humans can become angels. On the contrary, he didn't believe in the creation of the universe by God. He didn't believe in Christ's eternal existence according to John 1. He didn't believe that Christ came in the flesh as a real human being. He didn't believe that Eve was created from Adam's rib but from his sperm. He didn't believe that days in Genesis 1 were 24-hour days. Moreover, Clement wrote in his Stromata that he cannot explain the mysteries because he should thereby, according to the old proverb, put a sword into the hand of a child. Origen, just like Clement, preached universalism and purgatory prototype, which means that eventually everyone at the end will be saved. He preached the theory of pre-existence of souls with various purposes. Origen argues that the condition into which a person is born is dependent upon what their souls did in this pre-existent state. He claimed that one of these souls was Jesus Christ, who was basically created by the Father. Origen, influenced by agnosticism, taught that Jesus' body appeared differently to different observers according to their spiritual capacities. Origen has also seen the creation of the universe in Genesis 1 as an allegory. The reason why I'm saying all these things is to build a context to show you the spiritual wicked environment in which Clement and Origen lived. From all the places available at that time, Alexandria was the least useful for the preservation of the Holy Scriptures. And I'm not talking about weather conditions, but spiritual conditions. Occultism, Gnosticism, Neoplatonism, philosophy, astrology, and even Hinduism in this place were widely practiced before and after the times of Jesus Christ. Additionally, Alexandria was famous for worshipping pagan idols like Serapis that lasted until the 4th century. Alexandria was an intellectual Babylon where every traveler was forced to leave the copy of every work they possessed. Apart from Antioch, there was also a large community of Hellenistic Jews in Alexandria. And those Alexandrian Jews could have been involved in stoning of brother Stephen in the 1st century. In 1844, 500 kilometers from Alexandria, in the St. Catherine Monastery, Constantine von Tischendorf claimed that he had found Codex Sinaiticus. He supposedly found it in the bin after monks put it there to be burned, although this is firmly denied by the monastery. The codex is regarded by the monastery as having been stolen. It is believed that Codex Sinaiticus was written in the 4th century and contained almost a complete Bible in Greek with some apocrypha books. The codex could have been written by 4 different scribes, either in Rome, Caesarea or Egypt. This codex is of Alexandrian text type, and its biggest sin is that it minimizes the deity of Jesus Christ. Between the 4th and the 12th century, 7 or more correctors worked on this codex, making it one of the most corrected manuscripts in existence. During his investigation in Petersburg, Tischendorf enumerated almost 15,000 corrections on the 2/3 of the codex. But according to textual critic David C. Parker, the full codex has about 23,000 corrections. Additionally, in 1862, Constantine Simonides, skilled in calligraphy, made the claim that he had written the codex himself in 1839 in the monastery of Athos. And according to Professor Bruce Metzger, the Book of Revelation in Codex Sinaiticus is corrupted and is considered of poor quality. This is the text that is praised all over the world and used as fundamental text for the majority of the modern Bibles today. Another suspicious codex is Codex Vaticanus, which is also of Alexandrian text type. However, similar to Codex Sinaiticus, there are a number of differences. Textual critic Hermann C. Hoskier enumerated over 3,000 differences in Gospels alone. Paradoxically, in the book of Acts, Codex Sinaiticus is equal to that of Vaticanus. Finally, Dean John William Burgeon, a supporter of the Textus Receptus, suggested that Codex Sinaiticus, as well as Codices Vaticanus and Codex Beze, were the most corrupt documents extant. This is what Burgeon said in 1871 about Codex Vaticanus alone. Codex B Vaticanus comes to us without a history, without recommendation of any kind, except that of its antiquity. It bears traces of careless transcription in every page. The mistakes which the original transcriber made are of perpetual recurrence. Latin Vulgate wouldn't be a bad book if it weren't for the unclear intentions and sources. Latin Vulgate Bible is mainly the work of Jerome, who, in the year 382, had been commissioned by Pope Damasus I to revise the Vitus Latina Gospels used by the Roman Church. Later, at his own initiative, Jerome extended this work of revision and translation to include most of the books of the Bible. Jerome's Vulgate Bible became the standard Bible for Latin-speaking Western Christians. Pope was so obsessed with Jerome's translation that he banned all other Bibles and persecuted those who used different versions. It became a serious offense to use any Bible text except the Latin Vulgate. Vulgate finally had become the common text of the Latin Bible in the 8th century, and there was no more interest in the Vitus Latina. In contrast, the Vitus Latina consists of all biblical texts translated from the Greek, which do not correspond to the Vulgate. Some biblical scholars even say that Latin Vulgate could be partially translated from the Codex Sinaiticus and Vaticanus, as it has similar features. One of which is the missing verse of 1 John 5, better known as the Three Heavenly Witnesses. The next one is very popular Codex Alexandrinus, which is one of the parts of the group called critical text. The character of the letters and the history of the manuscript point to Egypt as its place of origin. Along with Codex Sinaiticus and Vaticanus, it is one of the earliest and most complete manuscripts of the Bible. Even though it's Byzantine text type in Gospels, it's Alexandrian in the rest of the New Testament. This codex contains deuterocanonical books and is elegantly written but with many errors. Many corrections have been made to the manuscript, some of them by the original scribe but most of them by latter hands. In the Pentateuch, whole sentences were erased and new texts substituted. Finally, Codex Alexandrinus became a basis for criticizing the Textus Receptus. Next on our list is famous Masoretic text, which is the authoritative Hebrew and Aramaic text of the 24 books of the Hebrew Bible. This text defines the Jewish canon and its precise letter text, with its vocalization and accentuation known as the Masorah. The Masoretic text is the basis for most Protestant translations of the Old Testament. Here are the few examples. After 1943, it has also been used for some Catholic Bibles, such as the New American Bible and the New Jerusalem Bible. According to Menahem Cohen, Masoretes developed such prestige for the accuracy and error control of their copying techniques that their texts established an authority beyond all others. Masoretic codices provide extensive additional material, called Masorah, to show correct pronunciation and cantillation, protect against scribal errors, and annotate possible variants. The manuscripts thus include vowel points, pronunciation marks and stress accents in the text, short annotations in the side margins, and longer, more extensive notes in the upper and lower margins, and collected at the end of each book. In 1970, Ein Gedi scroll was found in Israel. It's dated between 3rd and 4th century and contains the Book of Leviticus, which is identical with the Masoretic text. Last but not least is the famous Byzantine text type, also known as the majority text. This group contains almost 90% of all surviving manuscripts of the Greek New Testament. That is over 5,000 manuscripts. Most of them come from 9th century and later, but few come even from the 3rd century. After the fall of Constantinople in 1453, those manuscripts migrated to Europe. And this fact allows us to move smoothly to the next group of manuscripts called Textus Receptus, which means in Latin received text. It was popularized in 1516 by Erasmus of Rotterdam when he published the first ever printed edition of the Latin-Greek New Testament called Novum Instrumentum Omne. Erasmus based his work on 8 manuscripts, all of which dated to the 11th century or later, and all but one were of the Byzantine text type. Although the Textus Receptus may be considered a late Byzantine text, it still differs from the majority text in over 1,800 Greek readings, of which around half represent translatable differences. However, multiple of the agreements between the Textus Receptus and the Byzantine text are very significant, such as the reading God in 1 Timothy 3:16 and the inclusion of the story of the adulteress. Before we move any further, I would like you to stop here and draw your attention to my timeline, where you can easily distinguish 2 primary groups of different manuscripts. I already mentioned that there are over 1,800 reading differences between Textus Receptus and the majority text, so the agreement between those two is better than 99%. But if we would compare majority text to the critical text, there are around 6,500 reading differences. They still agree with each other in 98%, and paradoxically Codex Vaticanus and Alexandrinus are similar to Byzantine text in Gospels. However, if we would analyze the accuracy of the Alexandrian text type alone, we can find that, according to Dean Burgeon research, Gospels as found in Vaticanus have over 7,500 deviations from the majority, with over 2,000 of them being serious. And in the Gospels of Sinaiticus, we have almost 9,000 deviations with over 3,000 serious ones. These two manuscripts, Vaticanus and Sinaiticus, constantly disagree with the majority of the manuscript's evidence, showing them to be suspect witnesses. Hermann Hoskier did a full collation of these two manuscripts in the Gospels and counted over 3,000 disagreements. Believe it or not, but Codex Sinaiticus in conjunction with Codex Vaticanus form the basis for most modern Bible translations. No wonder so many Christians are confused today. Wrong source, wrong doctrine. One of the biggest revivals of the previous centuries was because of the majority text and Textus Receptus, and not because of Codex Vaticanus or Codex Sinaiticus. Just this fact alone shows us which text could be truly inspired by God. And if the devil is in the details, then let's dive into details of missing verses from all those manuscripts. As you can see, there is a huge difference between Alexandrian and Byzantine text type. These are not some random unimportant verses, but verses that form Christian doctrines. And it's not like the latter manuscripts added those verses, but the older manuscripts removed them for a reason. That was an intentional attack by the devil on the deity of Jesus Christ. Isn't that interesting that some of the manuscripts migrated to the left and some to the right, when you look at Jerusalem from the east? These are the verses where God favors the right side over the left. Coincidence? I don't think so. Additionally, it was in Antiochia where believers were first called Christians, and it was the 7 churches from the book of Revelation, and not Alexandria, that were commanded to preserve the word of God. On the other hand, first Christians did not benefit in any way from Alexandria. That's it for part 1 of my video. In part 2, I will tell you which Bibles were translated from which manuscripts so that you can choose the right Bible for yourself.